Live here on We Play Games. So, welcome back to We Play Games. I'm Walker, and here we are in Age of Wonders 4 about to discuss the Mystic update, which came alongside the Eldritch Realms patch. So, the Eldritch Realms DLC, of course, came with like a lot of things in addition to just like the paid content. That's what the overwhelming majority of what we see here is. Actually, let me adjust my YouTube chat just a little bit, because we are going to have to leave this open, because I do want to have us bouncing sort of like back and forth between not only the patch notes, but also, the database in case anyone has any questions about like ways to build specific things. I'm happy to discuss that here. But like, if we want to show something off in the game, then we'll pop over to that. And that just means that like the chat's going to be here, but you'll do fine. So to get to the meat and potatoes of what the Mystic update did, it did a lot in terms of game balance. A lot of the biggest issues that existed in the game were addressed, but in doing so, they did cause some other issues, and so this has been a really interesting patch to just start like getting a little bit of playing around going. I had intended to start doing single player streams last week, but just kind of like didn't. So we're gonna see what we're doing next week. I think it could be a lot of fun. But in the meantime, I think we can get started on the patch notes. If you have any questions about anything in particular in chat, feel free to just like throw it up, and then in the meantime we're just gonna talk through everything and the implications. The first and I think most exciting thing for me out of all these highlights that they've dropped in here is of course the potential for multiplayer takeover. We haven't really done this like with the channel with Winsley or any of those guys, but I think it could actually be really interesting to play. If there was a way for like an observer to be consistently playing, actually, that would probably be my ideal way to do it. Just so that way people can get used like to the adjustment from single player. Like if you're used to doing a lot of single player manualing, then if you make it so that like other humans are using your things that you're fighting against on the map, it would be meaningfully more costly, and I think would help people adjust. So Fourway says, one thing you noticed is the patch, thanks to the buffs to tier 1s, necromancy skeletons. Yeah, necromancer skeletons, I don't think that they're probably still optimal from the perspective of like utilization of souls. That's like a big problem where like now, because of the existence of Eldritch Sovereigns, I did think until we got that ability to transform souls into thralls and then thralls into knowledge, that there was going to be a path for people to use skeletons. Because skeletons, they are a lot more durable once they just have, 20 or 30 more HP. I thought they probably would have been usable on the old patch if they just had like plus 10 or plus 15 HP base, and now they have the option for a lot more than that. But it is in this sort of issue where like, if you're using like an Eldritch Sovereign, which we'll show whenever we get to that point in here, you do have the ability to transform those souls into thralls, and so making a couple of like relatively ineffective skeletons is still, I feel a tier 2 skeleton would be nice. It's just also kind of a problem where like there are all these powerful things to do with souls, so I don't even know if there's like an easy way for Triumph to buff them a lot. But yeah, like for flavor, I think a tier 2 skeleton would be a lot of fun. So the multiplayer takeover is, to me at least, really promising. I want more observer mode stuff in the game, like from both a single player standpoint as well as the multiplayer, being able to jump in and do multiplayer takeover. I don't know if that's on Triumph's horizon, but I think it would be a lot of fun. Necromancers, to be honest, I think are one of the better parts of the Tome of Necromancy if you're using them for Whiteborn heroes. So like generally what you can do with Necromancy, if you want to start that Souls economy early, you just take Tome of Necromancy, you kill a free city, the dead hero goes to your crypt, don't sell the corpse right away, and then just take a Necromancer, and when you animate that dead hero using souls, it'll get the Whiteborn trait, therefore it'll be undead constantly, and if it's the only undead that's walking around in your stack with your Necromancer, then you're gonna have some pretty good auto resolves actually, because all of that haste and strengthened is just gonna go on to that hero automatically. Yeah, they do take souls to make, but I think the souls are also just like kind of helpful for the Necromancer, just like to depress the cost, because sometimes like that is an issue for people. But yeah, oh my god, auto resolves are going to be one of the things that we talk about in due time, because there are still some pretty serious bugs in the auto resolve. But like, they're going to be one of the things that affects actually like how we rank our cultural rework for mystics. So one of the first questions that we had here in chat was which of the mystic schools is the strongest. And it really depends on your rule set. So the very first rules that I think you'll start to notice when it comes to multiplayer that are like really consistent and very important are things like you can't use strategic damage spells on enemy players over and over and over again without engaging in combat, because the game really does break down at that point. Oh, let me close Discord because I know that has been an issue before and it was just beeping at me. And attunement is by far and away the best way to just do an infinite amount of world map casting. The School of Attunement gets access to Astral Echoes. So Astral Echoes have been reworked entirely from the old, pick this up and get a couple of little beeps and bops along the way. And then like at the end of the game, you can build this really big building that doesn't do anything because the game's over. So for roleplay and balance purposes, there should be a reason to do a lot of undead. Yeah, well, so I think personally, if you're going to use a lot of Undead Cinderheart, that Corrupt Souls is actually like one of the easiest ways to do it, especially if you just have a reasonable time farming the map on your tier 1 tomes. You can come in to tier 2 tomes with hundreds of souls if you're just geared up for it. Even if you just have 150 or 200, that's fine, because it's 90 casting points and 45 souls, and you just cast it 4 or 5 times, and then your front line is just bulked up into outer space. The issue there now, of course, is that the cost of building that corrupt soul is no longer just do you have the souls, but now it's also the wizard tower, and that means that necromancy is in a complicated spot because they can get access to those higher tier units, but it has a lot of finagling that you have to do. I think probably it's one of those things where we'll have to see how the Tome of Great Transformation actually plays out in practice, because if you can get bone dragons that way, without having to worry about a wizard tower in a town hall, then that might be worth looking into. But School of Attunement, I think without any sort of banning whatsoever, is the single strongest thing in the game right now, just because it does one of the things that is 100% bannable and should be banned in your group. You just really should not be able to cast Lightning Torrent 6 times on an enemy stack over and over and over and over and over again until their ruler is dead. But you can technically do that with School of Attunement, so it's really good without any sort of rules considerations. But the thing is that that's kind of true for all of the rest of the Mystic cultures as we'll walk through it. So much of how we evaluate this has to be informed not only by the playstyle, but also what you guys are actually banning and allowing, because there's a lot of really ludicrous stuff in this. But I do think that with the current rule set that we play with on Winslayer's group, I think that School of Attunement is still probably the best. When it comes to Evolved, it's a little more complicated because in Evolved they've taken away the strategic damage layer spells. But even if you just do one stack, one spell per stack, this is still enormous when it comes to your early game creeping. So the reason why this is so unbelievably impactful was this a save where we were playing as Attunement? I played so many different things. Yes. Okay, so this is a game where we were playing with Attunement, and we just got Lightning Torrent, and we were able to just use Lightning Torrent to help clear a whole lot of things really quickly and do lots of damage to. I think we cleared maybe it wasn't this Attunement playthrough, but we cleared, oh no, it was this one. We cleared a couple of silver infestations on turn 12 or whatever by just dropping a couple of Lightning Torrents on them. And then we're gonna show this off later. We're gonna show a bug with the auto-resolve AI and Eldritch Sovereigns. But Attunement giving you the ability to deal damage on the strategic layer to enemy stacks, therefore reduce the models remaining in those units, and therefore reduce the damage output that those units can do without hurting the EXP bonus that you get from fighting them, right? Because it doesn't care if the unit that you're fighting against is at 12 HP out of 80 or 80 HP out of 80, you're still going to get the full amount of the EXP. Attunement is great for farming. If you're not playing unevolved. I don't know about the evolved mod, honestly, because like the balance there is going to be pretty meaningfully different when it comes to the strategic layer stuff. But other than that, like that big thing for attunement, they of course still have access to spellbreakers. The spellbreakers we'll talk about and show off whenever we're showing off the other two tier 3s for mystics, but like this is probably still one of the strongest things that you can get. Now they have lost the active ability on attuned cast to just being passive casting points. That's actually a meaningful nerf over the course of like a longer fight, but a meaningful buff over the course of a shorter fight. And the ability to just shred a whole lot of buffs has gone from being like a unique thing to something that, especially in multiplayer, you're probably going to see all the time. And so how exactly you evaluate this does depend a lot, again, on your rule set and the way that you're playing, which is unfortunate, but it is true. And then I do think that probably losing Cosmic Ablation for most builds for attunement, if you're going to be playing with, you know, Evocation or Cryomancy as you're starting, that this is actually like kind of almost a good thing for you, because it means that your auto-resolve AI won't be casting something that doesn't inflict either an AoE damage or a frozen effect. So I think that like overall I'm actually pretty happy with the School of Attunement and the way that it plays out. It's just largely dependent on being able to cast Lightning Torrent or Blizzard or Phantasmal Ritual, and if you can't do that, then of course the valuation comes down. So School of Potential is the next one. This is probably the weirdest one in the game, in my opinion, because of the way that it actually works and because of the way that we've been told that it works. This is not actually, I think, like a school where you want to have thousands and thousands of spells, but rather the biggest bonus that I found when it comes to utilizing School of Potential is using it as a specific tool to lock out particular spells. So one of the problems that you'll notice if you watch a lot of auto-resolves, if you're playing with like Tome of Warding because you want to use Phantasm Warriors because they're really strong, and Mark of Invulnerability is an incredibly powerful spell when it comes to manual combats, but the auto-resolve AI loves casting that spell and has no idea what to do with it. So like you'll very frequently see the auto-resolve cast Mark of Invulnerability on your ruler, who then like uses a phase to blink to the other side of the board and then use a summon from like 13 tiles away, and so use this spell that did literally nothing except waste 20 mana or whatever. And School of Potential actually gives you the control that we have been asking for so long, as long as you're smart about it. I don't actually remember if I have a potential save file on hand right now. No, it doesn't look like I do. But the way that it works is that it'll tick up like in this little counter over here until it gets up to like a certain amount of arcane inspiration. 3 has been what I've noticed for most of like the first times. And then you'll have the opportunity to lock it. When you lock it, as it mentions here, you get an economic benefit. But more importantly, I think, when it comes to combat, is that spell, while it is locked, the auto-resolve cannot cast it. And this means that you can actually use School of Potential to very carefully craft your spellbook for, like, very particular big fights, because it doesn't lock the spell right away whenever it reaches the like, necessary arcane inspiration. It just makes the option to unlock it available. So you can actually do a lot in... I'm just talking to myself for the next... Oh, all right. Reconnection successful. Thank you, OBS. I'm going to assume that is accurate. But this is like a really powerful tool. One of the things that we had in Planetfall, which admittedly I don't have like nearly as many hours on as I probably should, but one of the things that was cool there is that you did actually have flexibility and control over which operations your AI would attempt to use in combat, and that's what you get here. Like, this is a really powerful tool when it comes to crafting your spellbook for important fights. Just, you can carry some things, exploit them for value early when it comes to their tactical combats, and then maybe like around turn, 15, 20, 25, you look to get some of your tactical combat spells built up with a lot of this inspiration, and then you lock them right before a Gold Wonder fight, so that way your AI will actually cast spells that are good. And I think that is actually a great way to utilize School of Potential, but it's sort of like the opposite of what we've been told, which is like research tons and tons of spells so that you can exploit them over and over again. I think the economic benefit of exploiting the spells is like highly variable, and I would say that this is also like indirectly because of the way the Arcane Inspiration works off of like the spell tier. This is actually one of the best things for utilizing tome fragments if you have like no rules on the tome fragments. It's really powerful to get access to even just like a tier 3 or a tier 4 spell for exploitation early on, depending on, you know, what sort of resource you're getting out of it. That's another one of the problems generally for School of Potential, is that like not all of these bonuses were created equally. They're really, really different. But I think the bigger issue for School of Potential is that they have so many things that are like bannable. So right now enchantment spells may cast +1 additional spell this turn. Fortunately, there aren't like a bazillion number of enchantment spells. Let me see if I can like call that up over here in the database. There's not a crazy amount of combat enchantments, but there are a few of them, and anything that gives you access to, you know, like most of these are just event based, but they're, you know, Tome of the Stormborn, this is a pretty solid option for a combat enchantment. Same with this is a spell that you can cast and it won't hurt you, and therefore it'll count towards effectively an extra overchannel. I can't imagine getting to Tome of the Eternal Lord ever in the current patch. It seems like a pipe dream, but like being able to cast additional spells is probably the only thing that makes Wizard Kings potentially competitive with Eldritch Sovereigns right now. And I do think that it makes them potentially competitive with Eldritch Sovereigns, because casting extra spells in manual combats is so good. In you know, auto resolves in the map clearing phase, then like this is not as important. But like, given that these are all on higher tier tomes, you know, as you get further and further into the game in PvP, you're going to assume that you're going to be doing more and more manuals, because you're probably going to be fighting against other people at that point. But like, in terms of maximizing the bonuses here, I think that like literally none of this matters, and the only thing that I really care about is the flexibility and control over my spellbook, and it is actually really good when you get that part rolling. The dissonance is kind of this is a little disappointing, and B, just like not very user friendly. Raise your hand if you're like someone who on day one was like, oh cool, Potential, they cast a bunch of spells and do a lot of things, I'm gonna play you know, the Mana Addicts. This is a pretty meaningful non-bow with Mana Addicts, because like this generally wants you to, so like the way it works, gameplay dissonance, they deal like a delayed damage when they attack an enemy, and then you cast a spell to deal extra damage. But the way that Mana Addicts works is it wants you to cast the spell first and then attack. And so like this is a, oh wait, maybe I need to refresh my chat box, because that was a problem last time. It could have, yeah, all right, there it is. I'll pop that out. Put this back down here. Cool. But like, I think overall Potential, because they have access to like not only one bannable thing but another bannable thing, because the Spellweaver is also sort of like another overchannel effect. Anything that gives you an overchannel effect is already into like warning Will Robinson danger zone, and they have it on their tier 3 battle mage. So this guy, the Spellweaver, let's just pull it up in the encyclopedia here so that we can see the really fancy stuff. But this is another overchannel effect. And so like, how you handle like more than one overchannel on one culture, I don't know how this is actually going to work out in multiplayer, honestly, because they're like, both of these things are potentially bannable, and they're all on one spot. It's like the dissonance isn't great. It's fine for like, I think, tuning something down just a little bit, but because we have two overchannels and the way to like control your spellbook and in auto resolve, like Potential has a lot of stuff going for it. I don't think it's quite on pace with Attunement, but I think that there is some value there, and the SPI is really, really good. The Spell Arcanist library is effectively, in terms of its research, on pace with an Alchemist lab, which is just like a ludicrously powerful SPI to have access to. It's a little more expensive, but like other than that, it's really good. So School of Summoning is, I think, the one that people have been like drifting towards the most, and there are some really nice things things about School of Summoning, but there are some big problems with School of Summoning too. So the first nice thing, of course, is that they've reworked Astral Echoes. Of course, Astral Echoes here for potential just like doesn't exist. It's used as the extra resource for Attunement where they use it for world map casting, but it just like potential doesn't even see the pickups. Summoning still sees the Astral Echoes, but the way they use it is they, rather than spending it on world map casting points, they'll spend it on leveling up their magic origin units. The issue I think that right now Summoning is suffering from is that the efficiency is pretty low, so it costs 3 Astral Echoes in order to get 1 XP point on your units in order to level them up, and so this is like a lot of casting, or a lot of potential Astral Echoes just to get 1 unit up, you know, to evolutionary rank or whatever. And if you compare that to the value of just being able to cast Lightning Torrent one more time, I do think that like overall School of Summoning is getting a worse deal than School of Attunement. And School of Summoning has the issue where like the auto-resolve will still sometimes just take your evolved like silver metal like tier 4 spider or whatever and kill it. The auto-resolve does these things still and always will forever. And so School of Summoning, by encouraging you to put lots and lots of resources into a particular unit rather than into world map casting, which is just like a generically useful resource, this is much higher risk. It does have really good payoffs though. And so this is why I think a lot of people are drifting towards it for things like single player, because the more manual combats that you do, the more that you can actually babysit those evolutionary summons and the magical origin units. I think the more you're going to get out of School of Summoning. But I honestly, in terms of auto-resolve and multiplayer, have not yet been particularly excited about School of Summoning. I think the best, like air quotes, best thing that I saw with it so far for myself was playing around with like actually a champion Phantasm Warrior, just trying to get the like impressment done and then just kill people on like turn 20 with a bunch of legend rank Phantasm Warriors. And that was like cute, but I don't think that would work very well on like a 7 or 8 player map or whatever. And I think that some of the other issues when it comes to their auto resolve, they're it's not that they have bad ones, it's just that like they're ultimately, everyone here, all 3 of these are still relying on Arcane Guards and Arcanists to hold the ground at the beginning of the game, and Arcane Guards unfortunately are pretty spineless. So if you're going to be using any of these guys, then like look at ways to get spell shields early, maybe like Scions of Evil is I think just a generically really strong trait for Mystics because it gives them a guaranteed spell shield. But look for something to make your early game work a little better, so that way you can use all of these fun mid and late game tools. Because like the stuff here for summoning really is good. First, of course, we get access to a tier 3 summoner as a tier 3 cultural support unit. Tier 3 cultural support units are basically non-existent up until now, but this means that this is something that's going to get racial transformations. We're also going to get enchantments associated with the support unit type, a great defense mode, and then of course the Astral Bond ability. If you look at this, you should immediately think of things like Mistlings, where they can make best use of both halves, like almost all of this. But you know, there are lots of different ways to utilize an Astral Bond summoner. This is a colossal amount of damage that it can add to a magic origin unit, especially if you have ways to buff them out into outer space. But buffing into outer space is a much more dangerous game in our current patch, it does seem. They of course also replaced the attunement like across the board. Now the attunement ability for like regular attunement is actually still doing cosmic damage, sort of, but rather than it being raw random cosmic damage, it is based on the type of spell that you just cast. I don't know if this is really a buffer nerf, because ultimately like being able to pick up fire damage while playing around primarily with lightning damage was actually like a neat tool, because it allowed you to clear people who are weak to fire more easily, like for instance, undead and whatnot. But like overall, I think this is about flat in terms of value, and then potential having its dissonance, I think, is mostly a weakness for that. But then summoning giving you temporary HP and strengthened is actually very helpful in auto resolve, as you would expect, simply because units do take damage. But it's not as helpful as you'd hope, because damage is like almost random as to which creatures it goes onto in combat. And so like you'll very frequently see where like you'll cast a spell and you'll have like an arcane guard at like 50 HP that doesn't get healed off of this and doesn't get any extra damage off of this, therefore won't actually help you clear the board any faster. So at least your magic origins are getting strengthened, but like how you evaluate this is pretty complicated. It depends a lot on what your stacks look like. But because of this, the Astral Connection ability, your stacks really should look like mostly magic origin units once you get the ball rolling. The issue with the summoning is just like, how do you get out the gate really quickly? But this means that like all of your heroes, if you are playing with a champion ruler, then your champion ruler, they're going to give all of your friendly magic origin units +5 morale. So if you just have like three heroes that have this ability and like 2 or 3 summoners, then all of your magic origin units will start with +30 morale, which it means that they're like automatically in crit range, and they have like a little bit of flexibility for a couple of things to go wrong in terms of morale without giving it back. And you don't even have to go that high, right? Like if you're playing with Tome of Zeal, you can just use the spell that gives Inspiring Chant to give everybody 10 morale that way too. But overall, like, I think the big ranking for these guys, because of the issues with auto-resolve still costing you access, I think that School of Summoning is mostly going to be for rushing, based off of my experience with it thus far. I think that it does do best when you're trying to use Phantasm Warriors to kill people. I think it does do also relatively well with beasts. So one of the questions that I had, like on the prior streams, was whether or not Tome of Beasts allowed you to actually get tier 2 spiders, but it does. It gets that now, even prior to the Wizard Tower. So like you can find really, really good units with Tome of Beasts and School of Summoning and get your value that way if you just don't want to play with Phantasm Warriors and you want to play with bears instead. Like that's a very reasonable direction to go. Let's see. Anything else important here for those guys? Not really. So the unit viability. This is the other like really, really big change in the Mystic patch, and I think the one where there's the most complication. So the unit viability was people on Reddit wanted lower tier units to be viable for longer. The issue there is that the higher tier units already had like a meaningful setup cost and a meaningful opportunity cost associated with them, and they also had this issue where like at least their level ups were really good because they had really, really astronomical EXP requirements. But they got the best level ups. But now the game is like really different to the point where I do think that it is overtuned. I think we need to see either the costs come down on the higher tier units or the rewards go up, because right now like the way that the game actually works is that you probably want to be making like tier 1 legendaries for a meaningful amount of time, because they're going to be just as combat effective as tier 3s, but cost like half as much. It's really insane. So the core of it is as such. Now you cannot recruit like tome things without a sufficient town hall in place. One of the things that we used to do a lot is that if you did a research and you found something like an afflictor or let's see if something we can find that will probably build more consistently. Let's see, whatever. Yeah, like any of these tier 2s, like you're probably not doing a tier 2 draft, an Iron Golem or an Inquisitor. Yeah, both of these guys, you would like research the tome for these guys, and because they're both draft units, it used to be you would make the research for Inquisitor and then you could go to a city. It didn't matter if you had built a town hall in that city or not. You could still build the unit there. It was really expensive in terms of drafting, so like, you did have to have some infrastructure in place in order to produce these tier 3 units, but as long as you had the infrastructure in place to do it, you could bring it over straight from the tome. This meant that you could spike up your power level pretty quickly by utilizing that infrastructure and that research. But because now you have to go through and build these higher level town halls, you can't really do that anymore. And you should be able to just like, okay, well, you know, the lower tier units have their own set of problems, and they do have their own set of problems, but because of the changes that they've made down here, the bonuses and the strengths of these problems vastly outweigh the weaknesses. So the other thing they did, of course, not just changing the drafting, but also the summoning. Summoning now requires you build a higher level wizard tower. Fortunately, they did throw some boosts on, but I gotta tell you that like the boost structuring for population in Age of Wonders 4 I think is wrong, because the way that it's structured right now, like, even if you're going heavy food, you're still going to go like way behind someone who just raw builds their, you know, wizard tower 2 without the boost. If they wanted food to matter more, then the population requirements would actually be lower, because I guarantee you that a large number of people are still, especially in multiplayer, are still going to be building, especially 2 for the ability to summon 3 and the extra rank. They're going to be building this without a boost, even if this is at population 8. And it's because there are going to be plenty of economies that are going to have enough production and enough, you know, ability to actually build things by killing things on the map, that you can grow this wizard tower 2 without the boost. But like, if you're playing big nature and you're trying to use a whole bunch of farms and wait for this thing to come around, one, the farms aren't really doing anything for you along the way, so that's an opportunity cost for investment right there. And then 2, there's this secondary issue where like, if you're waiting until 10 population for the boost, even if you get that, you know, maybe like 5 or 10 turns before somebody who wasn't on big food, if they built this thing already and have, you know, 3 or 4 of these tier 3 units on the board, and now you're waiting until you get this boost, so like maybe you start building it midway through and then you get the boost at the end, you're still going to be like maybe a dozen turns behind them in terms of unit production, and in multiplayer that means you're dead. So like these boosts need to come down. I like 4, 8, 12 personally, but I think you can play around with it, but they're too high. So like the Wizard Tower Apex 16 population, like this is impossible. You're never gonna do it. But this is the real crux of it here, the unit rank. We've discussed this already, but I do think that overall this is important to highlight. Now, rather than it being where what you got out of your level up scaled based off of the tier, because it used to be like that, now all level ups are effectively the same. It's 10 HP every single time, and then at elite and legend rank they get +1 armor, +1 resistance, and +10% damage, which are they're like sort of standing in for just getting a higher rank unit, because you can actually we can do that pretty cleanly here by just showing off like-minded things. So Mystics, Arcanists here, because they're tier 1 units, they don't have any sort of bonuses for their defense or resistance. Spellbreakers, because they are tier 3 units, they get +2 defense and +2 resistance, and so that tells you that like the interstitial battle mage, the tier 2, should have +1 and +1, and then you can see that we have +1 and +1 here. So like in a sense, when you get to elite and when you get to legend, you sort of get a +1 rank, like a +1 tier on that unit. And this is why producing those legend rank tier 1 units may end up being like the real core of what Age of Wonders 4 looks like. And of course, this is actually like a starting to become a real problem for some of the other servers, like Dread Reaper server is having issues with this, and I think we are too, honestly. Like this is so much power for low tier units, especially if you happen to have a faction that's good at keeping them alive, like barbarians. It's not too difficult to just use ritual alacrity a lot. So let's see. Oh, right. And of course, secondary summons. Secondary summons, this is another thing that's kind of like changed around a little bit, that the secondary summons that you get off of things that aren't actual units are pretty bad, because they don't scale up in terms of their like HP and EXP, but they were kind of like always in that spot. So I don't think this is a real meaningful nerf against them. I think rather this is a more meaningful nerf against like summoned actual units, not secondary units. So things like Wild Speakers, I think, are meaningfully worse because they're not going to be summoning like a tier 1 unit with 60 HP to fight against a tier 1 unit with 70 HP. It'll be a tier 1 unit with 60 HP to fight against a tier 1 unit with 100 HP. They're going to get absolutely dunked on. It's going to be pretty rough. I'm gonna double check actually that the audio here is still working. If unless anyone is in chat and can post something like just to confirm that this isn't crashed, because it did appear to have in OBS. Why are you like this? Why are you doing this? There are 42 concurrent viewers, so maybe it's just okay. Audio is working. All right, good, Daedalus. I don't know. Anytime OBS crashes or gives me like annoying beeps and bops, I'm reminded of the time that I was streaming and something crashed and I was just streaming to myself for 45 minutes. That was pretty fun. But yeah, right. So here's the other big part of the low tier change is that the city draft structures are now giving ranks. This is, I think, the biggest issue, honestly. It's not so much that I worry about, like, the low-tier units being good. It plays differently, but I don't think it's inherently a problem until it gets to the point where replenishing them becomes effectively instantaneous. So there's already tools in the game for things like Scions of Evil. Let's see, like... the wiki. Let's go to the Age of 4 wiki. This is another fun tool. I wish that we could just like do everything in the encyclopedia, but I would say probably the biggest weakness in the game right now is the encyclopedia. There's just like not a lot of useful stuff in the way that it's organized. It should be a lot easier for people to use. Let's see. Faction for the wiki, and we'll show off Scions of Evil, but this is just like one stand-in. Do not think that Scions of Evil is the only way to get unit ranks. I just think that it's generally one of the best ones. But this is +1 rank for all units of pure evil alignment. But even if not, just +1 rank for all shield units. You do this, yeah, it's really maxing out the tier 1 non-evolve units because there are all of these society traits that give you all of these ranks, and they went ahead and added ranks on blacksmith and armory. You don't even have to build a smith's guild in order to make it so that you can just produce legend rank warriors as barbarians right now, and that is an enormous problem for game balance. I don't think that this was necessary. I think in fact that this is the worst part of the change, because there should be a downside risk, right? If you lose your legend rank tier 1 unit, you should feel badly about that thing being lost to you and the cost of trying to bring it back up. So like maybe cap it to like they can't be produced at above like elite rank. I know that the evolved ones can't be produced at above champion rank, but I just think that it's overtuned, because it means that now you just don't need the higher tier units. And I don't think that that's correct. Like getting access to them through the Rally of the Lieges, which thankfully is standardized and therefore a lot more balanced. But like this is just it's a very, very weird game experience, because like knowledge is still useful, but it's mostly just for enchantments for warriors and phantasm warriors, and I don't feel great about that, but it is fun. I will say that it's very insane. All right, so Pantheon update. I'm not going to talk about the experience points because I don't really care about that. If you care about farming out experience points for the Pantheon, my recommendation for you is play the game and have fun playing the game, and when you do that, you will get more experience points. If you play the game more, you'll get more Pantheon. And then like just don't worry about the optimal way to do it. Even if you're a min-maxer, like just don't worry about it. Like that, this is one thing where the more you play the game, the more that this stuff will just come to you. The Eldritch themed hero loadouts, so one of these in particular, the Umbral Direcaster's staff, is actually really good for early game auto resolves. So the Direcaster's staff, I think, no, I didn't actually use it on any of these builds here, but we can just show it off pretty quickly. Let's see, Hysteria Storm, searchable in the It is searchable in the database. So this is a ridiculous tool when it comes to early game clearing, because most of the time whenever you're clearing in Age of Wonders 4, you're fighting against mostly tier 1 and tier 2 units, and they're this 60% chance of displacing and turning them insane on an AoE that can potentially hit more than one unit is actually really good. We'll talk about like the real value of insanity in a little bit, because we're going to talk about that in regards to Eldritch Sovereigns and some of their bugs. But I do think that overall Hysteria Storm as a tool for auto-resolve clearing is actually really good. You don't really care. I don't think you should really care that much about like the Umbral Warrior's Great Axe. Like if you want this sort of effect, then just play with the Society trait. I think that's generally better. But the Demon Slayer bow is also potentially really good. It really depends a lot on how often people are playing around with Tome of Corruption. Right now, that's always. So like Demon Slayer bow is, I think, actually an unsung hero, because it means that your ruler is just going to do 40% damage against like absolutely everything. But it doesn't do a lot in the beginning of the game, and so you do have to like evaluate it from that perspective too. There's some pretty nice quality of life upgrades. Most of these are I think like mostly for like single player people, but I do think that the Item Forge blueprints is actually quite nice. We will see how if we're going to come up with a way to translate them from session to session. Right now that's not the case, but if we had a way to save that would be really neat. The AI has, of course, changed around a little bit, but is, I think, probably the biggest source of problems for the current patch for Eldritch Sovereigns in particular. They did tune down the amount of extra ranks that they get. I think that's advisable, but as we discussed with the infrastructure, like you can kind of get infinite rank things right now all the time. But fortunately, this means that your opponents are, like the AI opponent is not going to have like +3 ranks on all of their tier 5 units. That would make very hard AI effectively unbeatable, I think, unless you were doing manual combating, because that would have been a lot of buff tier 4 and tier 5 units running around. I don't really feel like I need to talk about the art for Eldritch Realms. Like, just play the game. It's probably one of the best art-directed 4Xs I think that you'll ever see. And so, like, the art here, they could have just said, like, play the game, no notes. And that's my feeling on it, too. Same with audio. The audio and visual directions in Age of Wonders 4 are just, like, absolutely crazy. So good. So the combat, this is the biggest issue, I think. Actually, let's watch just a double stun bug right here in the middle of the stream instead of waiting until the end, just so that you guys can like see what's going on when I talk about the double stun bug. So nominally in Age of Wonders 4, whenever a unit is stunned by a frozen or a stun effect or something like that, that the AI is supposed to like behave appropriately and not send all of their resources to kill them. This is, I think it was either Jordy or Avoxel said that was the behavior that they were expecting. But the problem is that like you can observe combats and like see that this is not the case pretty quickly, depending on what kind of things you're looking at. So here we're gonna do an auto resolve. We did win without any losses. And so, like, you can just kind of sweep it under the rug and say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. If you're winning the fight without any losses, then, you know, blah, 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 you could just ignore it. But that's not the case, right? Like, not every battle is trivialized by just having either good rolls or like a good build. Some fights are complicated regardless. And if there's an issue where, like, certain tools in the game just straight up are not working, it really does need to be resolved, and we're about to. I think I watched this battle, and it was like in the first round or two that we saw the bug emerge. How did we do it? Was it Desperate Anguish? Yes, there it is. Right away. The very first action is stun this unit and then immediately kill it. So the double stun bug is there in the game, and of course, because of all of the different kinds of stun effects that Eldritch Sovereigns have access to through Delirium and through like Insanity and stuff like that, like Eldritch Sovereigns actually have meaningfully worse auto resolves than they deserve, and it's just because that double stun bug still hasn't been resolved yet, and so like that's the combat note that I want to see in here, is that someone has actually dealt with that, because it really does, it does hurt. So cultures, the dark, we're not going to talk too long about dark. I think that broadly speaking, dark is in a better space, but I still don't think it's good. I think dark is held back primarily by their weak unit roster. Like, they wanted to have something with that where they didn't need a support unit, and they kind of are in that space, but like it means that the things that you bring are extremely narrow. Like, I honestly cannot imagine myself wanting to bring dark without bringing herbivores, and I don't feel great like being forced to bring a particular trait just for early game clearing, and like literally just for early game clearing in order to make your military work. So, and of course dark is also held back by the fact that although dark warriors are really good at dealing damage, a big part of the game in Age of Wonders 4 is like just keeping your units alive if you can in autos, so that way you don't lose everything and have to replace it all the time. So dark, I think, although it did get a facelift in it, and it is a little bit better because some of the other factions are a lot better. Yeah, heal based on damage. I agree, Alpha Wolf. I think that would be a great way to upgrade Dark. And it, to be clear, Dark is better now. It's just that Mystics are a lot better depending on your rule set. Some of them are like arguably broken. I think that you should not allow Attunement to be as broken as it can be, unless you're just looking for a bad time or like a fun one-off thing. But like all of the Mystic cultures do look meaningfully better now, and then Reavers also looks meaningfully better now. So like because of a bunch of different cultures moving around, I think that Dark has actually gotten down into the bottom 3 very very convincingly, and it might even be bottom 2 now, and that's not because this is a downgrade, it's just everything else got upgraded better. So Reavers, what the heck happened here? So Reavers, first thing that makes Reavers so much better, so Sog, I actually have not noticed that at all. Are you playing on vanilla or are you playing on mods? Because I ran with a little bit of Fabled Hunters, Reavers last night, and Magelocks were shooting pretty consistently. So if you're, you'd have to show me no mods. You'd have to show me your build then, because that's not the observed behavior that I had in Auto Resolve. They would occasionally use Take Aim, but most of the time they were actually shooting because it is a single action attack. It has some issues where, again, on like a gigantic map, like with 18 versus 18 and no extra accuracy bonuses, so if it's like 30% of battle Sog, then it's probably just an accuracy problem. The AI is still not particularly smart at utilizing and like leveraging accuracy, which is why I think that if you want to use Reavers, the right way to use Reavers is not to lean into ranged units, but rather to lean into melee and frontline units that create marked that then gets utilized by ranged heroes. This is useful for a lot of reasons. First, of course, killing momentum ranged heroes are just really, really disgusting in both auto resolves as well as manuals. Meaningfully more so in manuals, of course, because the killing momentum doesn't always get triggered in autos, but it doesn't need to, and because you know all of your war breeds or all of your iron golems are inflicting marked with their just base attacks, then all of your like backline heroes aren't gonna have 80 accuracy. They're gonna have 150 accuracy on most of those attacks, and so they'll be taking them from like the opposite side of the universe and hopefully doing a ridiculous amount of damage to do so. Like the Magelocks, I think, you should play around with them, but I think they are actually meaningfully better based off of my observations with them. I saw them attacking most of the time. I do think that Reavers is in that space where, like, if you want to make them good, there's 3 traits that you kind of want, and they add up to 6 points, and so you kind of have to pick and choose your destiny. But like, these guys use athletics really well because so many of their units are not optional mounts, so if you want extra movement, athletics is great. But then the combination of herbivores and elusive together is actually really, really good for anyone who's going to be trying to utilize ranged units in the beginning of the game. And it's great for like mid to late game scaling, because elusive gets better and better depending on like how many enemies you're fighting against are going to be breaking defense mode. But like overall, I do think that Reaver is much better. I just think that like people are probably going to make the mistake of assuming that Reaver is still like oops all ranged units, and that is not the case. The ranged unit AI is still not great, even though the Magelock unit itself is much better. The AI that attempts to use this still doesn't quite get what's going on. But like after the Magelock change, which one is better, Alpha? I don't know, because like right now Magelock rifles are absolutely disgusting. They're really dumb how much damage they do, and so I don't know. We'll have to experiment. But I think they're both really, really absurd. And because Reavers have the way for like literally all of their frontline idiots to massively, massively increase the damage and accuracy of their ranged heroes, I think that's the way to play Reavers. Like if you want to use a bunch of ranged units, then maybe you use some Dragoons or whatever. But because these are way better with Harrying Shot as a no cooldown. Just much better units. But overall, you really are going to be mostly using frontline things, I think. Primals, unfortunately, are still definitely in that space where like they've gotten only nerfs. And they weren't great in auto resolves anyway, so like I don't think that I would recommend playing Primals to newer players these days, especially because now the Animist is now locked at once per battle. This was, I think, an important and correct change. I think that having one unit that could just summon over and over and over and over and over again was not good for gameplay speed and not good for gameplay fun, and so I'm happy to see this go. But because the Primal AI still largely resolves on summoning and largely revolves around casting spells, both of which the AI is pretty bad at. Primals are in competition with Dark for like second worst. Any suggestions for changes for Feudal? The worst, yes. I think Feudal has so many different types of problems. So like the first big problem with Feudal, of course, is that like the AI just like literally has no idea how to use Steadfast. If you take the Steadfast ability, you'll see in your auto resolves that your AI will just like throw it on a random unit at full HP because it thinks it's just a normal buff. I think that if they're going to keep Steadfast as a core aspect of the Feudal experience, they need to introduce a little bit of like buff specific AI. I don't mean for every single buff and every single debuff. I think that burning and poisoned and electrified are all the same thing. The AI doesn't need to worry about any of that stuff. But if there's a tool that is supposed to define and sort of like promote the entire faction, the AI needs to at least be aware of that and treat it as such, because it's pretty disrespectful that it just wastes Steadfast effects like that when it could be keeping Peasant Pikemen alive. But the other big problem, there are two other big problems with Feudal, is that like summoning over and over again, Tiger Eye, like summoning I think is good, but I don't think it's the best of the mystics at the moment. But like beyond improving the Steadfast, I do think that the unit quality for them is just really bad. Like, one of the strengths for Barbarians is that even if you kind of take away Ritual of Alacrity, Warriors and Sunderers are just ludicrously efficient units. Whereas, like, the units for Feudal are trash. Like, they could just go through and add, like, 10 widgets to everything, and most of these units would be meaningfully better. But, like, Peasant Pikemen don't really do anything. They nominally are good at killing enemy big stuff, but the number of times that you encounter that pretty limited. And of course, although they do have access to the evolution into the Defender, Defenders are very, very low impact. They don't do a lot of damage. They mostly just stay alive. And that means because of the way that combat works, where you reduce enemy models to reduce their damage output, having a durable unit that doesn't do anything is actually not very productive. And then the archers also just kind of like deal damage, and of course like anything that revolves around units being able to stand next to each other is a complex thing whenever it comes to the auto resolve AI. They're better at doing it now than they once were. And of course the Bannerman ability is just like, this is a 4-turn cooldown. This is insane. And then of course the hero ability giving them economics means that you're like -1 level on so many of your heroes just to have the same economic bonuses that you would have on a lot of other things. It's just like Feudal. I think the right way to fix Feudal is not to make a single change. It's to do what they did with Mystic. I really hope that they do that and they just go through and they update Feudal. Somebody in chat, I don't know, like a month ago was talking about like different oaths, like from paladins in Dungeons and Dragons. I think that could be fun. I don't really care about like the theming so much as taking Feudal and turning it into a couple of different schools or something like that, because that would give them the opportunity to experiment, right? I don't think that unless they rebuild the AI from scratch, that Feudal is ever going to be universally competitive in multiplayer, even though there are some nice damage bonuses for the big manual fights towards the end. Your early game clearing is just so bad. But if they experimented and they played with, 3 or 4 different things, some of which just don't use steadfast but use better units, then that Feudal might be competitive. I don't know. I think the right way to do it is to like go back to the drawing board big time on them. To be fair to Bannerman, it's not that Bannerman are bad. It's just that like this 4-turn cooldown means that in auto resolves, your AI will use this immediately on a unit that has taken 6 damage, and then you won't have any healing for the remainder of combat. And then in a manual fight, you'll be able to use this once, and then that's it. So like this is way too slow, and this only really functions particularly well if you have access to Tome of Warding, which means that Feudal is just like super narrow. Yeah, if every Lord of X skill also gave an in-combat benefit, that would also be great, Cinderheart. That's a great option. It's just that like the way that it works right now, the entire game is mechanically hostile to the way that Feudal works. So Feudal is just like, I think generically the worst culture in the game, and I think the right way to fix it is to just give it the Mystic treatment. Let's see. This I don't think this matters. We're not even going to talk about that. This doesn't really matter either, although rebalanced population growth to better align with intended speed experience. This is something where I gotta like ping somebody on Discord, like Jordy or a Voxel or somebody like that, because the wiki is woefully out of date whenever it comes to food requirements for population growth, and the database kind of like has never had that to my knowledge. Yeah, Paladins as a tier 3 could be interesting on Feudal. Like if Feudal had options to do lots of extra spirit damage in combat and therefore be like, pretending to be high or something, then they would be better, right? If they had the way to do that, then they would be able to clear the Umbral Abyss way more efficiently. It's just that like Feudal has 10,000 problems. You can't really fix it with the snap of your fingers or anything like that. Outposts. So Outposts are a little bit different, but it's not because of what they've highlighted here. Outposts are actually different because of the Empire tree. I guess we can kind of like talk about the Empire tree just briefly here. The military engineering now no longer gives you a free work camp, which is, I think, mostly good. It was wildly overpowered with the way that it was giving you a work camp and everything else. I think probably I'm still not going to be building a lot of work camps considering how expensive they are. I honestly wouldn't hate to see work camps come down to 50 or 75 gold considering. But yeah, like it's just, Yeah, you're right. Like, your Lord of Crops should have a heal. Exactly. If the feudal, I think there are lots of levers they could pull to make feudal more competitive, or at least more usable, for both auto resolves as well as manuals. So I think that it's not that it's inherently a dead end idea. I think that it just needs some work, and they didn't have time to fix everything on this patch because they had a DLC to get out. So I remain cautiously optimistic that someone will come back and fix it. But like, this is a huge ding for early massive growth, but I think it's largely a healthy one, and I think that you're still mostly going to want to pick up Materium 1 pretty early on. It's just now mechanically hostile it's a fantastic phrase. Like, you have to be aware of the way that the game actually works, not the way that you want the game to work. And the game does not like feudal right now, but it does like impressment. I like this skill blew my mind the first time that I was looking at this on this patch, because I normally like, this just doesn't do anything, or at least it used to not do anything, because it used to reduce the upkeep on your tier 1 units, which just don't have upkeep. Tier 1 units gaining experience 50% faster, and this also is not just your racial units, but any unit, including your evolutionary summons. This is a much better skill. This is a much better skill. And so now the Chaos Tree has gone from having Call of Chaos and then just like mostly nonsense for a little while to having like 2 really powerful back-to-back things. And this means that like Empire Affinity, it's not the only thing that matters, right? Like, I have for a long time have told you, at least in my opinion, I think the nature affinity tree is awful, and that the nature tomes are really good, and so you just take nature tomes if you want to, and then just ignore this part. But like, now Chaos Affinity has some real front-loaded stuff. This is still sort of like not a lot of gold, but like the first couple of picks for Chaos are ludicrously powerful. And that has something to do with Outposts. Oh, right. The Empire, that we were in the right place almost. Philosopher Soldiers, we speculated about this, and thank God that this is not the case, but now you do not get the knowledge for producing things at a higher rank, so you cannot immediately get ludicrous amounts of knowledge from just making things, and just using Philosopher Soldiers. But what this does mean, of course, is that if you're trying to use Philosopher Soldiers and still get a lot of knowledge off of it, that something like Impressment is actually useful. And this is also something that plays particularly well with something like Summoning, because Summoning isn't just getting you like tons and tons of like ranks up front. It's translating those astral echoes into ranks and therefore triggering Philosopher Soldiers. So I think if you're going to be thinking about summoning that, you know, especially if you're thinking about summoning that's going to utilize Phantasm Warriors early on as a threat, or evolutionary summons as a threat, that getting big astral and then a little bit of chaos does actually look like it could be a really fun way to go. This is nuts. This is, of course, a lot better. Order Skill Career Soldiers going from 20% experience up to 30% experience is great. I think that the order tree largely has been getting better, not because they've been changing things here, but because they've been changing things back end that have made it a lot better. Like, it used to be that the units recruited through Rally of Leashes ability on, like, you know, game release, this just didn't matter, because you just didn't use Rally of the Leashes, but Rally of the Leashes is hella good now. And so because they've been buffing other things that feed into the Order Affinity Empire tree, I think you can actually start looking at the Empire tree for things. There's still issues where like the first 3 picks of this are effectively dead, so if you're really looking at Order Affinity, you need a lot of Order Affinity in order to get to the picks that do something. So I'm hoping that they go back and do a little bit of adjustment like the way they did with Chaos, but like there's almost exclusively bangers after you get past the opening phase of Order nonsense being not good, and so this means that big Order is also like potentially useful. Just be aware that like when you build a faction, your starting affinity does not need to be your late game tomes. These things can go whatever direction you want, but early game affinity has an outsized impact on the development on your empire tree because it accumulates turn after turn. And so if you want to get to Philosopher Soldiers really early, then starting on 4 or 5 Astral is actually a great way to get there, right? And you can still go off in a completely different direction and exclusively play around with Balors and Chaos if you want. It's just, it's the way that the game goes. So factions. First things first, we get to talk a little bit about Mount Masters and Eagle Mounts. So Mount Masters, I actually am a huge fan of Mount Masters. Oh yeah, we're gonna get an evil penguin for sure. Do we do that in this build? I don't think we did that on this build because Mystics don't really care about having access to optional cav, but some factions care about having access to optional cav, and the ones who do, this is a really, really good upgrade. Mount Masters is a 1-point trait that gives you 8 extra movement on a meaningful number of your units. Even if all of your units aren't getting it, this is still great in terms of your early game clearing because of your ability to break up units, right? You can just send units to start fights for you and do reinforcement range. And 8 extra movement on your warriors or your Dawn Defenders or whatever for 1 point is great. And because they get invalidated by the Umbral Demon transformation, this is the cheapest way to accomplish that, right? You're not investing 3 points in order to get a trait that you will eventually drop entirely. You're investing 1, and you can take Mount Masters, and if you're worried about pole arms, then you just take Tough, and then Tough with a +2 physical defense it's sort of like the same points as an exotic mount, but you only lose 1 point worth of value when you do that transformation. And you're probably going to do that transformation. The new Beetle mount I haven't played around with at all alpha, because I think that right now, if you're playing competitively, you're probably not taking a 3-point trait as a mount, because you're almost certainly taking Tome of Corruption, which is something that we're going to talk about when we get there. But Tome of Corruption is arguably the best tome in the game by a pretty meaningful margin at the moment, and so it needs a little bit of maybe a little bit of fine-tuning in terms of its numbers or what it's trying to accomplish, but B, it also means that if you know that you're going to do a major race transformation that's available on a tier 3 tome that takes away all of your mounts, that the only movement traits that I think that I'm really excited to talk about are Mount Masters, because they're cheap, Eagle Mounts because they are the fastest, really, the ability to move around and scout and see things in the early game is so unparalleled that the 3 points I think does justify it even if you drop it. And then Athletics, because Athletics of course is a very different thing when it comes to evaluation, but I don't know if you can use any of the other mounts right now given how good Corruption is, and that does break my heart. But yeah, Corruption doesn't even just compete with what Shadow wants to do. Corruption, single-handedly has answers to everything. It's just the best. It's absolutely nonsense. Signature skills got rebalanced. This is great, actually. So Warding Bond was one of these skills that it goes up and up and up the more heroes that you have and the more manual combats that you're doing, but it still wasn't particularly good unless there was a giant power imbalance. But now with the damage reduction going up to 50% on Warding Bond, I could see you taking this. The thing, of course, with signature skills is that signature skills on your ruler, because they factor into your empire affinity, you mostly don't care that much about what the ability does so much as what the affinity is. But on your other heroes, having signature skills that are better is a good thing. I'm not 100% sure why Rallying Blessing got buffed here, because I do think that Rallying Blessing was actually very good. It wasn't as good as something like Mass Rejuvenation or Mana Unchained, but I would say that Rallying Blessing was meaningfully better than most of the summon abilities most of the time in most combats. So I guess I can't be mad that one of my favorite abilities is getting way better here, but it's way better here. And then same with Visions of Woe. before the rework for fumbles and crits on the last patch, they changed it so that it used to be that crits rolled before fumbles, and so if you had a 100% crit chance, you literally could not fumble, and so Visions of Woe just like didn't do anything. If you can daisy chain Warding Bond with Astral Ward, maybe Tiger Eye, like that's something that I probably won't see very often myself, because like that does probably rely on a lot of manual control. But like overall, Warding Bond I think is good enough now that if you're feeling sciencey and experimental, you should try it out and see how it works, because I think that there is something to do here. It was already pretty good once you started doing a lot of manual fighting, but then Visions of Woe, so it used to be that you could just make this do nothing by having 100% crit chance, but then in the Wolf patch, I think it was the Wolf patch, they changed it so that now fumbles roll before crit, and because Vision makes it so that everyone automatically fumbles, makes it, and this is an auto success, like effectively your opponent had to have an AoE debuff clear or just get wrecked, and that meant that like although it was a full action and so you wouldn't be using it that often in manual combats, you would occasionally use it, and it was really good in auto resolves. This going to a single action seems like it might be a problem, but at least it's a problem that exists in a universe where single debuffs almost don't exist anymore, and so maybe it's not as problematic. We'll just kind of have to we'll kind of have to see. I like Reckless Rage getting better, same with Holy Retribution. So like I think this was largely a correct decision, except some questionable things. I'm not mad because I do love this action, but this was already really good for autos. I don't know why this one is happening. The Item Forge. So Item Forge, mostly the thing that I want to talk about in regards to the Item Forge is an idea that somebody gave me in Discord. I forget who it was. But one of the people in the Age of Wonders 4 Discord mentioned, why do multiplayer people even allow people to just make tier 4 weapons? It seems like they break the game. And that person was right. Tier 4 weapons out of the Item Forge early on, I think personally does kind of break the game. And so I'm going to recommend that on our next multiplayer game that we test out, only champions are allowed to make tier 4 weapons. Right now there's like almost no reason to be playing a champion as anybody other than high, and high, although they do get the most out of playing a champion, they're still not like good, and so giving them the tier 4 weapon as the exclusive tier 4 weapon forging, I think actually might be really fun. The rest of the stuff, and of course the Mage Lock and the Mage Lock power, this we'll not here because we don't have a tier 4 set up here, but we'll at some point do a Reaver build where we use a tier 4 Mage Lock and just like show off how stupid it is early game. It's really stupid. It's really fun, but it's really stupid. You can do so much damage with just a little bit of investment in some early game items. Other than that, the interface, that's not important. Oh, multiplayer. This is actually a big deal for me personally. I think that one of the big barriers to entry for a lot of people, it's not that everyone needs to be playing competitive multiplayer. In fact, I think most people should not play competitive multiplayer. I think most people will have way more fun with the game and therefore get more attention to the game rather than trying to play competitive multiplayer, just playing multiplayer with their friends, right? That I think is the right way to get Age of Wonders 4 multiplayer rolling. The issue used to be that there was this huge barrier to entry where like the game would just desync every 3 or 4 turns, and so it would just turn everyone off of it. We have still occasionally encountered some desyncs on the current patch, but they have been way less of a problem than they were on the previous patch, and that you can kind of just like see this here. And so anytime anybody asks me, Walker, what do you want for the next DLC, my answer is always going to be the same. It's always going to be, I want tactical AI that actually can use all of the cultures, so that way I can like actually be able to play with some of these things and feel like they're competitive. But I also want just multiplayer stability, because I want casual people to be able to play this game with their friends and have fun. Yeah, you could also Cinderheart tie it to Wizard Tower Apex. I think there are lots of ways to handle the item forge, because it is actually a big issue. Like the power that you get out of building a tier 4 weapon on like turn 15 or 20 or 25 is really heinous when it comes to just auto resolve clearing, and if you manage to get into a fight against an enemy player at that point, if your opponent, even if they're mostly using like elite champion legend rank tier 1 units, if your opponent is on oops all tier 1 units and you have a tier 4 mage lock, you're gonna one shot all of those babies. It's very busted, and so yeah, I think a suggestion to tie it to building could also make sense. But multiplayer has gotten meaningfully more stable, and I think that they really do deserve like major props for this. Like, even if these are all like one-off out of syncs that they fixed, and that, you know, they've introduced some more with the new patch, which I wouldn't be surprised. There's an entire new layer of the game. They should expect some more desyncs. I'm just thrilled anytime that there's more than an entire patch or an entire page of patch notes about fixing stability issues. So that a deep, heartfelt thank you to Triumph, and I do hope that more people just grab their friends and say, hey, let's play a 3 or 4 hour session of Age of Wonders 4. It doesn't even matter if someone's won or not. You're just having fun and exploring the game. So tomes, on to tomes. First thing, Tome of Summoning. Of course, this, you cannot actually use the Arcane Bond ability on Eldritch Sovereigns. I don't think there's anything anywhere that explicitly says why you can't do this, but you can't do this, which is good, because if you could do this, it would be pretty broken. But it does mean that like the top end, like the really risk-on positive outcome for Tome of Summoning doesn't exist. But fortunately for them, they have gotten some other really interesting upgrades. The Astral Keeper, this is something that means that now if you've ever recruited an Astral Keeper from a Bronze Ancient Wonder, you're probably never going to do it again, because now they're probably going to kill themselves. But it means that the summon ability is much better, right? The summon spell for this is much better, because it's going to actually more consistently get lots of healing for you in an AoE, and a big AoE heal is actually pretty cool. They posted a 1.3 literally yesterday. Oh, Winsay, this is not a patch. These are the patch notes from 8 days ago. I'm contextualizing the patch notes from 8 days ago with the experience of gameplay now, and like trying to understand, you know, what does this actually mean? And what this actually means for Tome of Summoning is that although this is like, I think actually the improvement for summoning well is meaningful in terms of getting you extra knowledge, but I do think that summoning, because it can't just universally hose Eldritch Sovereign, is still sort of in the same place that it was on the previous patch, where it's like useful against and for very particular niche builds, and so this is probably still a B. Tome of Amplification and Tome of Stormborn both were like two of the biggest real problems in the game in terms of game balance. It wasn't that, you know, like higher tier units were a big issue. It's that 30% damage or 20% damage arcing was really stupid. It was like we didn't use this ourselves because I thought it was kind of dumb, but we did get to see Zombie do this in one of our final fights, where he was just like, he had a ruler with arcing weapons and a tier 4 pistol, and he was doing like 150 or 200 damage per shot. It was really ludicrous. And so I don't know, man. Well, we're doing a deep dive on the main patch because like the overwhelming majority of the important things is right here. Most of the most recent patches have been just like touching things up. This is the really important stuff, right? Like this has not changed in the sense that now arcing weapons will not allow heroes to do hundreds of damage without without recourse. Same with the storm strikes themselves on the Stormbringers. So they went through and they really did bring down like the most problematic things. So amplified arrows is still useful for like a big ranged package. As to whether or not you're going to actually be able to use a big ranged package in Age of Wonders 3, yeah, persistent crash to desktop issues. I mean, that, you know, maybe it wasn't Songs of Silence and it was Age of Wonders 4 that was causing CTDs. It might be worth checking out Songs of Silence like tomorrow, because I'm gonna go back through and timestamp everything tomorrow, rather than doing a stream, because I think especially our stream with Nemke is going to be pretty useful to timestamp. But like, yeah, most of the stuff that they really did do in the big patch. Tome of the Astral Mirror, this is something that I think is actually a meaningful upgrade. So now Summon Astral Reflections lowers the summons from 2 to 1. This is a meaningful nerf against like the traditional strategy of using Astral Reflections on like your summon or your support units. If you had an army of like 15 plus like maybe like a Spring Fairy, a Summer Fairy, and like a Scald, you could bring Astral Reflections, and then you would have just effectively an infinite number of Spring, Summer, and Scalds. This is not an infinite number, right? One extra one is way worse when it comes to leveraging supports, but now this is more flexible, because now you can actually use this not just on supports, but on real units. And so the Tome of the Astral Mirror, this is, you know, you're not going to be using this on heroes, but this is I think a meaningful upgrade for the Tome, especially when it comes to its usability in auto-resolve. And if you're going to use it in auto-resolve, you know, something like Potential, where you can explicitly make it so that your higher tier spells are the only ones that your AI has for those more dangerous fights, I think you actually can get value there. Tome of Famous, I don't really care that this went from 20% to 15%, because you're just not going to fight against that very often anymore, or at least not against this very often anymore, because everyone's going to have corruption now. But like, if they do something to rebalance corruption, then this is, I think, a largely a positive change that they've introduced. In regards to the Chaos Tomes, Pyromancy, the biggest change for Pyromancy is actually not this right here. It's the introduction of the Umbral Abyss, right? The Umbral Abyss gives you access to lots of resources if you go in there to fight, and all of those dudes are weak to spirit and fire damage. So what this means is that if you want to use, you know, like big chaos to do ridiculous amounts of things early on, that you can go with like a Tome of the Horde strategy, but Tome of Pyromancy does still scale better into the mid to late game. So let's just like briefly talk about Tome of the Horde here, because I know that people get excited about it, but there are some issues with Tome of the Horde and trying to use it as a solution. So if you're going with like Phantasm Warriors and you're trying to kill people with Phantasm Warriors, Tome of the Horde will make your Phantasm Warriors undeniably stronger, right? +1 defense, +1 resistance, +5 hit points, and +1 status resistance isn't quite the same as adding an extra like rank to all of your Phantasm Warriors, but it's not as far as you would think. But it comes with its own set of problems. Tome of the Horde, 1, does not give you any damage enchantments. One of the things that's really important in the game is that these damage enchantments, unlike racial transformations, do apply to other units that you get out of the board. And you're gonna get other units out of the board. You're playing with chaos, right? So without the Umbral Abyss, I think we're probably gonna be playing with it on for our next multiplayer campaign. I would guess we probably have to have a vote about it. I think that the Umbral Abyss speeds the game up in a meaningful way, so it really just kind of depends on what speed you're looking for. I like that. I like it being a little bit faster, but it is definitely a lot of resources that you get, and it definitely makes the game a little bit easier if you're farming it and the AI isn't. So we'll probably play with it for the next few months, and then or at least the next month or so, and then see how I feel about playing with it all the time. I like having it in my back pocket as an option, though. I think it's fun. But like Tome of the Horde, what do you get here? You get absolutely nothing that scales up anything that isn't getting racially transformed. And one of the issues with Spawnkin is that, like, one of the big strengths of Phantasm Warriors is that they have relatively few models, and by taking them and giving them spawnkin, yes, you will increase their damage, but you also kind of like increase their weakness to something like Infectious Insanity, because Phantasm Warriors were like always good at dealing damage, especially to each other. Tome of the Horde doesn't really help them get around their weakness to control loss to CC, and it does have some big issues with like self-killing, and so like I think the Tome of the Horde is actually still kind of not where you want to be if you want to go with big chaos, and there aren't a lot of other options for low tier chaos tomes. Like, you can use Tome of Evolution. There is actually, I think, a good argument for looking into Tome of Evolution for certain particular builds, but if you're trying to use like Phantasm Warriors, I think Pyromancy is genuinely better. Let's see. So Revelry, this is, okay, Mayhem, Infectious Insanity going from 60 to 50% is cute, but kind of doesn't matter. Infectious Insanity is currently not a particularly interesting spell. It's just like, hey, if you have access to an AoE debuff clear like Tome of Alchemy, then the spell doesn't do anything, and if you don't, then you lose on the spot. I don't think that's a good game design. I think that I don't know how to fix this. Maybe make it an AoE insanity on all the units rather than a spreading thing. But like this is not, I don't think this is healthy with the way that it currently works, especially because Insanity is reworked so that people will specifically attack their old friends. And it's not like I'm complaining that it's super overpowered, because there are a couple of like solutions to it that effectively mean you can't cast the spell, Alchemy being one and Corruption being the other. And so this is just like, it's uninteresting, right? It's just it's flip a coin, or you know, the battle is decided outside. So Summon Irregulars spawning non-magical organs to turn into Warbreeds is cute, but like you're on tier 3 tomes now. You're not gonna be using Summon Irregulars and Monstrous Rebirth that often in multiplayer or in auto resolve only, because like you're just not gonna be casting this. The AI is not gonna have a good way to cast the spell most of the time, I think. And then the Summon Irregulars ability, although it's like cute, it's not going to be giving you all of the ranks that you normally get off of building things, and the ranks are a big part of why the high tier units are going to be powerful. So if people are telling you that Tome of the Horde is busted now, I think they're lying to you. It's not bad. I think that there are some good arguments for potentially looking into it, especially for a rush build on a 1v1 situation, because +1 defense and +1 resistance on low tier units that have 110 HP is a lot more useful than on tier 1 units that have 80 HP. Like, that's just mathematically true. But like this still just doesn't have like the tools that I'm generically looking for when it comes to early game tomes. I think if you want to do big chaos, I personally will be trying Pyromancy instead, because I do think that it is generally better. Tome of Devastation moved to Unleash the Warhounds to Tome of the Horde. I don't think that matters super duper much. Monstrous Rebirth is a fun tool for manual combats. We will see how much it matters in regards to auto resolves. I haven't taken Tome of Devastation because I haven't gotten to the point where I've been playing with that, with like a big chaos going in that direction yet on the current patch. But I do want to see like how the auto resolve handles it, because if the auto resolve does handle it well, then it might be worth looking into. It's just, this is a dangerous tool to give them. So really, really big thing here for chaos channeling. Not a big change here, but rather just like a fun conversation that that Morgie like tuned us in on. Let me see. Actually, I got to move this little text box out of the way so that way you guys can see what's going on here. So Morgie, after the most recent skirmish, we were just like talking about like different spells that were kind of bannable, or at least necessary to be bannable, and he actually recommended that Sacrificial Slaughter is kind of a problem if you know what you're doing. This is the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life, because Chaos Channeling is not a particularly strong tome, but Morgi, I guess, is also an evil scientist, and so it just like experimented with it. And apparently, Sacrificial Slaughter is not a purely random debuff. It's actually like from a good group of things that are going to give you stuff like Berserk or Stunned or Insanity, and so the positive outcomes here for random debuffs are actually really high. And if you use this on something like a Baylor, they're going to do a lot of damage. So this is a very potentially powerful tool if you know how to use it. It's just that this is one of these things where I heard about it and I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool, but I think that you're probably the only person in the world who can make this thing work. But if you want, this is certainly a direction to go. Tome of the Tentacle, I think it's fine. I think Tome of the Tentacle, I think it's like, this one is absolutely broken and probably needs to be readdressed. Tome of the Tentacle is fine. Like, Constrictors are pretty good units. They are generically better than I think all of the tier 2 polearms for like everybody's culture. So if you're taking Tome of the Tentacle, then you just like probably not going to make halberdiers or whatever. Just use a Constrictor instead. This has good stats and it performs well in auto resolves. Retaliating Growths is super disappointing though. The first and only time I've ever seen this in auto resolve. Do you know what this cast this on? Not my hero with a tier 4 provoke weapon. Oh no. It cast this on a Soother. So like, this is a buff that the auto resolve has no idea how to use, and that should be reflected meaningfully in the grade for the Tome of the Tentacle. The Tendril Labyrinth, positive city stability is largely useful for high and not as useful for anybody else, but it is useful for high. So I think if you're trying to use Tome of the Tentacle, that you probably should be moving towards probably looking at high, because they can use the tools that are here the best. They also have battle mages just to utilize constricting focus, and then something that shreds enemy status resistance, whether it's Cryomancy and Blizzard or if it's just in Eldritch Sovereign with Phantasm Ritual. Regardless, the constrictors, it's not that they're like good, it's just that they are better than all of the other tier 2 polearms, and in terms of pacing, because you can't produce the tier 2 polearms until you have the Town Hall 2 made, like, you're just not gonna have a lot of time where you're making your regular tier 2 polearm. And so especially if you're gonna be playing with something like Athletics, then like the fact that this and like the fact that their attack has the constricting base, like, this is a really big part of what makes them good actually. Alpha Wolf, because this is a lot of damage. There's a lot of damage, and so like these are I think very, very solid tier 2 polearms. But in terms of their combat, they are tier 2 polearms, right? We're not talking about 14. So like Tome of the Tentacle is probably somewhere around B or C, depending about how you evaluate things. At least has really good affinities, but the fact that this spell just like straight up doesn't work, and that this is mostly for only one faction, and that this is a marginal upgrade, and that this is like good but at a low enough percentage that it only really works when you have status resistance shredding. Tentacle is not it's not gonna blow anybody's minds, unlike Corruption. Whatever, we're here. Let's just talk about Tome of Corruption. So Tome of Corruption, like, even if all of the rest of the stuff was blank, which it's not, we're not going to go into like wild detail as to why Umbral Mistress is crazy good, but this is a crazy powerful tier 4 mythic. The Umbral Incursion is also just like a useful tool when you're fighting against a free city and you want to get extra farming. You just cast Umbral Incursion on the free city, it makes another infestation for you to fight, so this is a giant upgrade in terms of your potential for farming things. But Gloomstrider is the best anti-CC tool. It's on level with Alchemy. I think it's marginally better though, because it's a passive, and it's just because of like the Curse Eater ability. So unit loses one random negative stats effect, not one stack, like the entire negative status effect. So if you have 5 weakened, it all disappears, and you get 10 temporary HP. But you're mostly not going to be doing this to like clear 5 weakened or whatever, you're going to use this to get around Infectious Insanity. You're going to use this to get around just generic Insanity or Frozen or Stunned. And because the opponent, even if they want to try to keep you stunned and put extra debuffs on there, they're not guaranteed to target those things. This is ludicrous. This is so, and it's also fast movement and floating. This is, I think, arguably tier 4 level. Like, this could be on a tier, this entire tome honestly could be a tier 4 tome, and that would be like an appropriate level, honestly, the same way that they took Tome of Amplification and moved it to tier 3. I think the right way to handle Tome of Corruption is move this to a tier 4, because this is not a tier 3 tome in terms of its value. Corrupted Boon is exactly as busted as we expected it was going to be. I don't think I've ever used Treacherous Reflection, but like a clone enemy ability is meaningfully worse than a clone yourself ability in Magic, so I assume that it's probably in the same boat here, where like this is mostly only going to be big for big manual combats, but this should be big for big manual combats. And then like the other tool here with the Throne of Insidious Whispers, guess what else we get on this? we get world map casting points. Yeah, this is a tier 4 tome that is accidentally a tier 3 right now. And then the Tome of the Cleansing Flame, I have not played around with this enough to evaluate it, but I will tell you that like all of the things that we were hoping about, the way that it could clear debuffs like Mind Control and Domination are not true. Unfortunately, those two abilities are like in mod tools. You can just look around and see which things are allowed to be cleared and which things aren't, and the Mind Control Dominate group just cannot be cleared, even if like you have some fancy things going on with friendlies and non-friendlies being cleansed. I think that's a big flavor spew, because like the corruption is just broken right now. It needs to be fixed, because it's just nonsense. You could do a lot to fix up Throne of Insidious Whispers too. Yeah, it's way too good. The Cleansing Flame, if this thing could clear Mind Control and Dominate effects with the Cleansing Flame ability, it still wouldn't be broken. It would just be like fun and interesting, but right now it doesn't have that. So like I need to see this in action and see how Pyre Templars actually line up if you're going in to clear the Abyss or whatever. But I can't see us waiting around to actually use this most of the time, unfortunately. Let's see, where else were we? Materium, I don't think Tome of Rock changing around a lot of stuff matters that much. I don't really care that much about bleeding either. And I understand that they don't want Slowed on everything, and Slowed is already on, it's 4-way. Tome of Corruption currently is in the state where, honestly, we might want to ban the entire tome until, Triumph comes through and fixes it up, because it's not remotely balanced at all. I think a lot of the other balance changes that were done in this are fun and good and proactive. I think that the lower ranks being better isn't even a problem as long as they rein in the infrastructure. But like Tome of Corruption is Oko in Magic the Gathering. Like it is an unbelievable problem once you know how to use it. But fortunately, unlike Magic, Triumph can just fix it. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. Rock, I'm not gonna waste everybody's time. I don't really care about this. Terramancy, I do care about this. So Terramancy gets a world map casting point bonus, and now I'm gonna randomly kill your support unit, and literally that's the only thing I can cast it on spell is gone, and a 90% chance to inflict stunned on top of a 3 sundered resistance if it uses the sundered resistance first and then checks for the stun, which we'll have to experiment with. If it does that, then this means that this is like borderline 100% auto stun. And then also physical damage is one of those things that because everyone is going to get tons of resistance in the mid to late game, except for Tome of Corruption, which makes every conversation impossible to have now. That like, I think the physical damage is actually genuinely really good. Yeah, like the obsidian weapons is fine, except that like all of a sudden, because everyone is going to have 20 to 30 to 40 more HP, that dots effects are just a lot worse if they don't have anything else going on. Because they're just not gonna kill models, and then they're not gonna like reduce the damage output of the unit that you're hurting until it's too late. So like this is fine, but like Tome of Rock is still pretty narrow. But I think Tome of Terramancy might actually genuinely be pickable now. We'll have to experiment. The problem, of course, is that like one of your tier 3s is sort of like forced on corruption right now, and then the other one, if you're like really sweaty, is also forced on transmuters, which means that like you don't have another tier 3 slot, and that's a problem. But that's one that I hope gets addressed by fixing up Tome of Corruption more than anything else. I'm usually a fan of buffing the things that are weak rather than nerfing the things that are strong, but Tome of Corruption is a big problem. Speaking of buffing the things that are weak, Unit Severing Golem, this is a colossal upgrade for the Severing Golem, which is good because Severing Golem was pretty skippable. I still don't know how often we're going to be using it because the game does look like it's really fast right now, and so like trying to theory craft on a unit that's on anything above a tier 3 tome, I think, is kind of irresponsible with the current makeup. But if we ever get to the point where the game slows down a little bit more, this does look like a meaningful upgrade for Severing Golems. You still can't really mass them because they're big artillery pieces, but yeah, like dots were pretty bad before they changed them from 8 damage down to 4. It used to be that you couldn't like stack them into outer space, but if you just like watch a couple of combats and see, okay, would this have done more damage on the old dot structure or the new dot structure, that was a really meaningful nerf to damage over time, and then it really hasn't ever gotten better since then, because as Anthony highlights, there's just a lot of things that are immune to them also. Dots are just, they're the only one that you should really be excited about, honestly, is Decaying, and then all of the other ones are ones that if you pick up accidentally, then they won't hurt you. But you should not try to go out of your way to specialize on them. Decaying is a little different because of the preventing healing makes it a lot better. Tome of Roots, this still basically sucks because everything is immune to poison, so this kind of just doesn't do anything. Tome of Fertility, I want to play with Tome of Fertility because Temple of Fertility, I also want to see the food requirements for growing population, but like the Tome of Fertility or Temple of Fertility is a lot more producible now. 250 production is a lot less than 450. I agree, Cinderheart. Burning should lower morale or something. There's ways to do it. And yeah, anything that applies a single debuff, especially if it's like only a single debuff that you're trying to leverage a lot, Curse Eater makes it a huge liability. It's just healing your opponent for nothing. The Tome of Paradise, getting access to Enchanted Bloom, turning everything into forested grasslands, I think is actually really cute. I don't know how often this is going to matter, but if grasslands and forests granting 2 production and draft and food double counts, I don't know about that. Like, I haven't played with Paradise yet, but if it did, that'd be really good. And I think that would be a reason to potentially investigate this further. And I do think that Tome of Paradise moving up into the Goddess of Nature for the extra crit chance and damage on your heroes is actually pretty nice. Yeah, I think Curse Eater should not eat an entire stack of debuffs, or it should maybe have like a cooldown or like a % chance or something. I don't know how to rebalance that one because they want to have ways to add tons of debuffs through the corruption spell, and then ways to get around tons of debuffs through the Umbral Demon. But like it just does everything. It does everything, and it does it so well, and it does it so cheaply, and it does it so efficiently because it's a dual tome. So like, you don't even have to have any shadow or any mystic or any astral if you don't want it. Like you 3-0 is just as useful as 1-2. it's a big issue. In terms of order, I don't think the subjugation getting marginally better is like a big deal here. If Tyrant Knights are not particularly strong. If they wanted to make Tyrant Knights a little bit better, then they probably need to go back to the drawing board on higher tier units, honestly, at this point, simply because the ones that were already not good are falling pretty far behind. They didn't highlight this here for Tome of Necromancy, but the necrotic magic thing was apparently a bug. So Empowered by Magic, I haven't talked about it Alpha with Fred, but that is a good option when it comes to manual combats. When it comes to auto combats, it's largely dependent on like what sort of monsters you're fighting against, because it triggering on like, you know, poisoned effects especially. I do think that there is an option for utilizing Empowered by Magic, but like it really does depend a lot on what you see on the map, and it's much better in manual combat, to the point where like I think a lot of people who only do manual combats overvalue it, just because they are able to get value out of it that the AI does not. But burning and poisoned and electrified triggering it do help it out meaningfully, and so I think that there is a space for it as a good source of strengthened. So Necromancy, necrotic magic apparently was not supposed to apply on AoEs. I think it does apply on friendly AoE, although we have to check with like holding Alt down and throwing Pyromancy like a fire burst on your own guys. But the thing is that like your AI is literally never going to do that, and so Empowered by Magic, if you're taking a trait that doesn't do anything for you except in manual combats and some auto resolves, it's not as good for multiplayer as you're used to when you can like control all combat and actually maximize those triggers. So Tome of Great Transformation, Bone Dragon getting a lot better is really good, because Bone Dragons are a mythic and deserve all the love and respect. I don't know how to evaluate them, because if you can, and because I haven't gotten to them yet in the current patch, but if you can make these things without access to a Wizard Tower or a Town Hall, and you can get to tier 3 Great Transformation off of, you know, utilizing souls and the casting, then you can make it so like your knowledge income doesn't matter as much as simply your ability to cast the Eldritch Sovereign like knowledge spell over and over again, and that can get you up to Great Transformation pretty quickly if you have a lot of souls to work around with, and therefore maybe there's an option for somebody to use a Bone Dragon and Great Transformation as a way to get around some of the rank reworks. Oh, right. Units will no longer get their full health and move when evolving. This is a really big nerf for summoning, and I think one of the other things that like kind of helps pull them down generically. Magebanes, you kind of have to ban these, honestly. Like, I would say that the fact that that's another thing we'll talk about when we get to the Eldritch Sovereigns. There's just like a lot of things that need to be banned on the Eldritch Sovereign. You can play with them, but there are like a lot of individual things that I think need to be banned on the Eldritch Sovereign, so that those probably also need some sort of balance pass. But Magebanes, because of the Spelljammer being effectively bannable most of the time right now, this is one of these things that you mostly still skip in multiplayer. Dragons are a lot better, but they're still like impossible to get, so that doesn't really matter. Wait a second. Did they not have a section in here for the Eldritch Sovereign? What? All right, they didn't have a section in here for the Eldritch Sovereign, so we're gonna very briefly talk about the Eldritch Sovereign, and then I suppose that will be the end of the stream for this stream, and then we'll be back with Nemki at like 2 p.m. But the Eldritch Sovereign. So the first thing that you probably need to notice about the Eldritch Sovereign, as we highlighted with the mind control problem, is that like a lot of the things that they do are not going to be particularly favorable for auto-resolve, but there are ways to get around this. First, of course, Eldritch Phase actually isn't as dangerous as long as you have survivability options available to your ruler, whether that's, you know, like something like Bulwark or Tough or Resistant, or elusive or whatever. Like there's ways to get more survivability on your dude. But more importantly is that if you have something like Eldritch Phase, and I don't think I have herbivores on this build. No, I don't have herbivores on this build, but if you did, that would make your ruler like borderline unkillable in combat, because the AI will prioritize taking your ruler and then like phasing across the entire board back to your back line to eat plants. It might mean you lose other units in auto resolve, but it means that like the Eldritch Sovereign themselves actually are pretty. These were notes for the Mystic update and for Eldritch Realms, sort of. They included a lot of things from the Eldritch Realms patch, or like DLC, in that patch notes. It was just the Eldritch Sovereigns that weren't really there. But like overall for the Sovereign, and like the things that are just like crazy broken, Phantasmal Ritual is incredible because this gives you a damage spell on the strategic layer that is not tied to specific tomes. This means that if you want to play with like Warding and Zeal as your two tier 1 tomes, and you're playing with an Eldritch Sovereign, you can still take Phantasmal Ritual, and you can still do damage on the strategic layer using a strategic spell. So this opens up a lot of gameplay, I think, and is largely healthy. Mass Phantasmal Ritual you should not allow in your multiplayer games, I think, because it is way too good. Phantasmal Ritual also may be bannable in like you can't cast it on enemy players. That one I think we have to experiment a little bit, because 20% max HP is like a lot better against enemy players than it is against the map. But like this is really dumb. It's all units in target and adjacent provinces take 15% damage and lose 1 status resistance. This is not a particularly fun or interesting spell as the way that those things normally go. Same with like Flash Freeze and the like. And let's say, speaking as someone who has used this on their own, but like Delirium, this causes a lot of problems for your auto resolve, because it'll turn a unit insane, so that unit should be fighting for you, but because it also gives that unit 5 sundered defense and 5 sundered resistance, every single time you use this ability, all of your friends will immediately kill the unit that has gone insane. This is an AI bug that definitely needs to be fixed, and I'm certain tied into the double stun bug as well. The Quickening Ritual being only 2 turns means that like you're really only actually using this right before big fights, but in big fights it's actually useful. So the Sign of the Huntress, that's the -1 range plus 30 damage. I think it's going to be largely dependent on how much you do manuals. I think that's pretty bad for auto-resolves, because generally speaking, the 2 biggest things that your ranged pieces are going to have problems with in auto-resolve are accuracy and getting too close. And -1 effective range is actually going to be penalizing them sort of like on both sides of that when it comes to the auto-resolve, and so the extra damage there I think is dangerous to convince yourself of its value. But that's, the more manualing that you do, the better that plus 30% damage is, because you can just mitigate the downside by just playing it out on your own. I'm also not like a huge fan of the Astral Siphoner Ritual spell. I think that generically, in terms of early game value out of your Eldritch Sovereign, you get way more out of Mesmerizing Draft than Astral Wisp. And because like most of the time I think you should be banning the Mage Bane, then the only thing you're really getting out of the Astral Siphoner Ritual is the passive bonuses for HP and resistance, and then every once in a while you can drop in a friend, but the Siphoner itself is actually a meaningfully better tool to play around with. But this is just incredible. This is like, as is this. Like, I think the generic play pattern of utilizing Draft Ritual in the very beginning of the game, maybe like the first 2 or 3 big uses of thralls going into that, and then picking up just like a lot of knowledge through Dark Knowledge Ritual is really good for you. I think Skeleton Summon with Summoner Mystics is fine, Vank, but I don't think it's what you want to be doing with your souls, because we're not playing with souls here, but there is a spell that's like 30 mana and an incredibly small amount of casting points to transform 30 souls into 3 thralls, and then you can use the thralls to either generate enormous amounts of draft, 150 draft for 45 casting points, and 1 thrall is a great deal, or you can use it for Phantasmal Ritual, or you can use it for Dark Knowledge Ritual. Like, because of that linkage between souls and thralls, I don't think there's really a space for skeletons unless you're not playing an Eldritch Sovereign, which you don't have to, right? If you don't want to play an Eldritch Sovereign, you don't have to. But I do think that it makes the game just like a lot better, because all of the tools that it gets access to are pretty good, except for some of them that just do not function in auto. And of course they are balanced by the fact that they do not have access to a warfare. So they do count as summons too, but it just doesn't matter that much, because like the souls are still invaluable and useful on so many different things. Umbral Disciples, yeah, so actually I kind of like Umbral Disciples. I want to play it out in an actual like multiplayer game on a larger map where we get more time to actually explore the Umbral Abyss, because like, you know, this game that we played last Sunday was specifically designed to be really, really fast, and so we didn't really spend a lot of time or at all in the Umbral Abyss. I think maybe everyone scouted it and maybe took like one fight in it, if that. And it's going to be like turn 19 and we're going to have a big manual combat and then it's going to be over. But like if we do a larger map, especially a larger map with a free-for-all, then I think that the Umbral Disciples option, not because it's good when the game goes long, but because it's good when the game offers you the time and pacing to explore the layer, and it's so fast at exploring that layer. I think that it is. I think there's a good argument to try to use Umbral Disciples in multiplayer. I think especially if you're. Oh, right. You know what? Why don't we do as the last thing here before we leave, just like a brief conversation about 3 different potential builds for 3 different schools of mystics. So here we've built out, this would be like essentially a school of summoning build that I would recommend for somebody to try out, see how it goes. We're starting with Tome of Warding for access to the Phantasm Warriors, so that way you can, you leverage your their points there if you need to, have like a really, really strong early game, or fight off against a rush strategy. And we're using Umbral Disciples specifically for the purposes of being able to clear that layer, to just get extra knowledge, get everything rolling as quickly as you can. And then from there, I think you kind of just like have to choose your own adventure. But I think that typically I would actually think that something like this, in terms of utilizing magic origins, would be ideal, that you pick up Famists and specifically Mistlings here on tier 2s. This is as long as you have access to a wizard tower in your capital at level 3. No, it's level 2 where you get the summons 3, but as long as you can do that, you should be in good shape to just stay alive until you get up to your like really useful, truly powerful magic origin units. You're not going to be investing any points on your Chaos Eaters, obviously, because you're ideally going to be picking up the fight for power and then just utilizing access to Balors that way, and then maxing them out with Tome of the Archmage as like sort of the final step here. There isn't notably here on this build, we do not currently have access to enough materium to be able to use the Tome of the Golden Realm, but honestly, like, the game's probably going to be over around here anyway. So like this stuff is mostly just if you're playing with a larger map or more resources or something like that. But I think that this is actually a generically good way to build Tome of Summoning, and I think it would get you most of what you're looking for, and would leverage Umbral Disciples pretty well just for that clearing phase, because you're not using, outside of the Mistlings, when you're doing your early game clearing, you're not using non-racials, right? Like, the Phantasm Warriors get the Umbral Disciple transformation, and therefore can also explore along with you, which is way better than most of the other summons that you get, except I suppose summon irregulars on Hoarding, but I do think that this is... starting with 4 Astral, I think, is a lot more impactful. And then if you're going to go with like School of Attunement, something like this, I think, is advisable. You want to play with Evocation or Cryomancy just so you have a strategic layer damage spell. You can do strategic layer damage through like Phantasm Ritual, but I do think that the ability to spend mana, especially if you're going to go with a Mad Caster for the expert channeling, which does save a lot of money for you. I think that this is actually like a really sick way to play it out, and then just using Lightning Torrent, right? This is largely dependent on what your rule set with your friends look like, because not everyone is going to allow you to use Lightning Torrent against the map, but I do think that PvE Lightning Torrent is safe and fair to experiment with, and then like from there you get to just kind of like grow your economy into whatever you think will best fit with your build. But I do think that if you're going to go with School of Attunement, that I would very strongly recommend, like across the board actually, for all of the mystics here, I think you should seriously consider Scions of Evil, simply because this is a guaranteed spell shield at game start, and you'll see this for yourself. Your clearing is so much better and so much easier with a spell shield than like any other starting military bonus that you can get. That it's crazy. Like you lose way fewer things when you have not only a durable fast unit, but a durable fast unit with a stun. And so just being able to pick one guaranteed is I think a really, really strong option. And then if you want to play with like runesmiths because you just like researching things, and you need starting Materium Affinity for something, then this is here to be your friend. So in Derek, I think that honestly, out of the signature skills, this is another sort of issue for the Eldritch Sovereign. Whatever, we can just reset this. So the Mindbreaker ability, because Mindbreaker, you're going to be using this still mostly in terms of auto-resolves. This still doesn't work in auto-resolves. You will very frequently see someone get hit with Madness, and then all of your units kill the unit with Madness, and then you've taken ability that effectively didn't do anything. And then the status resistance minus is nice, but like Eldritch Truth mostly doesn't work in auto resolves, and so I think that like most of what you're getting here is the affinity. If you need Order and Shadow, then Mindbreaker is your friend. This is like mostly true for most things, honestly, when it comes to your ruler, Derek, that like 75% of what you need to be looking at isn't any of this. It's just this, like, because this goes into this, right? And your Empire affinity matters a lot. And so what the skills actually do, I'm not super concerned about. Fleshweaver, though, does have issues where, one, the fleshlings are like not really units. Sometimes there are extra units that are pseudo units, and one of the things I actually like about the Gloom ability, where is it? Umbral Disciples, is that the extra unit that you get with Umbral Disciples off of Tyrant's Retinue is only marginally worse than the Crow you got off of Crowbow, and I was a really big fan of that one, but the Fleshlings are just like not real units, and they only get shot a couple of times and then die, and so then it's mostly just the value of possession. I think Madcaster is the best one, and it's not because like it's like good, it's because they just like the other ones don't really do anything other than provide affinity, whereas this one at least provides you with mana. And so I would say that for multiplayer right now, I think Madcaster is definitely like the one that I would look at the most. For skirmish, it's a different thing, right? In skirmish, if you're fighting just one fight and you actually have control over the units in question, then Eldritch Truth is pretty good. But because of the problems with the double stun bug and what seems it's kind of almost acting like somebody tried to fix it but was unsuccessful, and now rather than units getting around the double stun bug, they've leaned into it. But like I don't think I've ever seen Insanity do anything other than a stun like half of the time, because or just it maybe even just like target me and get all of my friends to kill me, but like it just isn't working right now, and it's because of the tactical AI. But don't let that stop you from the Eldritch Sovereign. Just don't take the pieces that aren't very good, or if you do take the pieces that aren't very good, then just be aware of the downside. Like, this is still fine, it's just that like you're mostly just getting -5 stun resistance and defense. This Insanity effect does not exist because the unit will be dead after using it. So as long as you're aware of that, then I think you will be all right. And starting Relic, I think that generically, if you are playing with Tome of Evocation, you should probably play with Tome of Cosmos to exploit lightning damage. And if you're not playing with Tome of Evocation, then you probably should play with the Relic of Havoc, because the fire damage on the current patch is just really useful. Oh, and Tome of Potential, or School of Potential. This is sort of like the last one that I want to talk before we sign out. But like School of Potential, if you're trying to leverage School of Potential in this game, then make sure that A, you have some really powerful high impact spells, and that you are managing the spells that your AI has access to. Because if you can make it so that your AI is actually casting like Astral Reflection in combat, in a like a Gold Ancient Wonder or whatever, because you've specifically deprived it of like 6 other spells that you do not want it to cast because you've locked them, then I think potential is actually useful there. It's just don't listen to the plan of research all of the spells and go crazy. That's really bad for auto resolve. Research spells that you specifically want, and ones that you are happy to have the AI lock, right? That's really, really, I think, what it boils down to. Okay, so that is it for the patch notes. I'm sure that people probably still have some questions, but I am going to be back in like literally an hour with Nemki. We're going to be doing sort of a how to play Age of Wonders 4. We'll all clear it with Nemki, but I'm going to assume that he's fine with this. It's probably going to consist mostly of me asking him like Socratic questions about the game, and then seeing how we can like flesh out his understanding rather than me just like teaching him from the beginning, because he seems to understand the game. So like I think it's more useful if he tells me what he knows than if I tell him things he already knows. So if that sounds like fun, then like go eat a pizza or something like that, and I'll see you in an hour.